Is it possible for Erdogan and the AKP party to lose power?
Essentially, for him to lose power, it means to give up a whole structure of interconnections that he has in his pocket right now. But he has a whole cadre, like a whole apparatus of a state that he has built himself, like a custom-made suit with the ministries and, the people that he has put in private companies. As a result, the stakes are very high. What's going to decide whether Erdogan gives away power or not is the scale of his either victory or, in this case, if we were talking about losing power, his loss.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Furnival. You are watching or listening to an OSW podcast. Today I'll be talking to Adam Michalski, an expert from OSW's Turkish department. We'll be discussing the upcoming elections in Turkey. So, in Turkey, on the 14th of May, there will be two elections being held, the parliamentary election and the presidential election. My first question is, why are both these elections being held on the same day?
Well, this has to do with the structure of the new revised presidential system that has been put in place since 2018, which essentially stipulates that both the parliamentary and the presidential elections are held on the same day, with the caveat that, of course, if the presidential elections go to the second round, then the presidential elections end 2 weeks later on. So, but the idea is that essentially the whole election process is streamlined, which essentially, from the justification of the ruling party, which was one of the one of the proponents of this change, was to essentially streamline the whole process. But in effect, what it also means is that whoever wins the parliamentary elections gets a boost of support for the presidential elections in the case they go to the second round. So this is also a very kind of tricky system where I think there are some type of benefits which one party can get out of the fact that both the presidential and parliamentary elections are held at the same time.
Do the presidential elections generally go to a runoff?
When it comes to winning in the first round, this system that we have right now in place has been only used since 2018. So since that time, we haven't seen President Erdogan win the elections in the first round. Everything had to go to the second round. So, I mean, this will be the second time when we will be witnessing this take place. The chances, however, this time seem to stipulate that the opposition and their candidate, Kemal Kilicdaroglu, has a bigger chance of winning in the first round. I think he's something like 47% in the first round. So we might see a chance that this might not go, but I would still stipulate that the chances of this going to second round are very high.
So you mentioned Kilicdaroglu, and before we get into too much detail, during my research, got a little lost in the alphabet soup of Turkish politics, and I was wondering if you could shed some light on it. So at the moment, the government coalition is made of three parties, but two rather large ones. These are the AKP and the MHP. Who are these parties?
Yes, so both of these parties have been in coalition since around 2015. The first one that you mentioned, the biggest one, the AKP, is the ruling party, the one that has been in power since 2002, from which President Erdogan himself is the founder of and has essentially been affiliated throughout his whole political career, a majority at least of that. This is the party that is essentially responsible for, what you would call the Turkish miracle economic growth in the first decade of the 21st century. This is the party that has been one of the steam engines behind the democratization of Turkey, essentially bringing equality to different religious and ethnic groups. This was particularly in the first decade of AKP's rule very visible. But this is also a party that ever since, I think, the Gezi Park protests in 2013, the massive protests against the government, has seen some form of a backsliding when it comes to these promises that it was known for. I mean, this whole economic miracle, the whole democratization project. So for the last couple of years, the party has been consolidating its power. And this had to do with the fact that we had a coup in 2016 that tried to remove Erdogan. And ever since that time, I think the AKP, and particularly President Erdogan, who is still in charge of the party itself, this is one of the reasons of the presidential, this is one of the caveats caveats of a new presidential system that the president can still be the leader of the party that he represents. The AKP has essentially since that time been ever more kind of becoming a little bit more arbitrary when it comes to its rule. And I think that some of these prospects of its democratization and kind of, welfare have been unfortunately falling back when it comes to its promises. When it comes to the other party, the MHP, this is an ultra-nationalist party that has been in coalition with the AKP since 2015. Essentially, when the AKP started losing votes, particularly the Kurdish votes, it supplemented them with the nationalist vote, and this is where the MHP came inside. The party itself is run by Devlet Bahçeli, who's considered to be one of the most ancient, as one would say, politicians on the Turkish stage. He is a ultra-right-wing conservative leader that has a very kind of strict view on the Kurdish problem, and he would essentially perhaps use Erdogan's power to have any type of questions regarding the Kurdish issue settled on a state basis, have essentially the topic removed from political discussion. So he's, I think, a very kind of right-winger, and Erdogan tolerates him mainly because he gives him votes and allows him to essentially have a ruling coalition that gives him a majority.
So the opposition at the moment is complex, but you mentioned Kilicdaroglu. So he's from the CHP, but he's representing this grouping called the Table of Six.
Exactly. I mean, this is how we kind of know them. He's representing a coalition of six parties known informally as the Table of Six in the media. First of all, the CHP is the oldest party in all of Turkey. I mean, it's celebrating 100 years since its formal foundation. It was set up by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk himself. And as a party, this is what you would call a conservative Republican party, in the sense that it views the Republic and a lot of what Mustafa Kemal Atatürk has achieved in his lifetime as kind of a principle founding logic behind what Turkey should be. I mean, it should be a secular republic. It should be a national republic in the sense of almost like nationalistic. It should be focused around the idea of Turkishness. It should be a republic based on virtues of essentially a Western type of state, with, of course, its own caveats when it comes to the form and implementation of which, a lot of the time the CHP has been known to be a ruthless kind of implementer of this westernization project, which hasn't found many supporters, especially when it was losing its power, which is one of the reasons why the AKP came into its place as a democratic force. So yes, the CHP is the oldest party. Kemal Kilicdaroglu, who's the leader of it since 2010, is the presidential candidate of that coalition. Within that coalition, we also have the Good Party, which is a ultra-nationalist party led by Meral Akşener, who is a splinter off from the MHP, which is the party that President Erdogan's AKP is in coalition with.
And
so
they are also rather right-wing.
Yes, they are right-wing. They're essentially, in terms of policy, they're very similar. The only difference is that the E party, the Good Party, has splintered off because when it came to the presidential referendum, the change of the political system, they had some big differences in terms of, whether this is a move going in the right direction or in the wrong direction. And so that's when they splintered off, and the E party, the Good Party, went to the opposition, and that's how their journey their new chapter with the opposition has started. And then the remaining four parties, we're looking here at a whole slurry of political ideologies stemming from, liberal conservatism to Islamism and anything, I think, in between that. I mean, this is, as many people have pointed out, a coalition of essentially all the colors of the Turkish political stage that you can imagine. And this is both interesting in the sense that for the first time we're seeing such a broad coalition of parties from right to left. But at the same time, it's a very dangerous situation in the sense that, you have six parties which essentially are led by the belief of, removing Erdogan from power, but there isn't really much more to it. And this is one of the reasons why people speculate that, while the elections can serve to unite them, what comes after the elections is something that might not be essentially easy to maintain this coalition.
So time will tell or will not tell.
Exactly.
We'll see in a few weeks. There is one other major party, the HDP, What could you tell us about them?
The HDP is also what you'd call the opposition, but it's something of an alternative opposition. It's first of all, it's the major representative of the Kurds in Turkey. This is a party that has been many times, its former parties have been delegalized by the previous governments, particularly the Kemal's governments. This is a party that enjoys essentially a very broad support amongst the Kurds, against something like 10% in each election. But it also has a kind of leftist agenda to it, which is why over the last couple of years it also has been attracting the marginal leftist votes that the Turkish scene generates. I mean, the Turkish scene in general is very right-wing, and we can talk about ultra-right-wing or kind of just regular right-wing points of view. But there is still a left-wing movement, and I think that the HDP has been gathering a lot of this attention.
How left-wing is it, though? Are we talking about liberal values, moral values, or, say, Marxism?
Well, I think that you could find everything, but as a party that tries to portray itself as a modern party, it tries to go in the direction of human rights, of equality, of something. So those are the kind of the left-wing ideals within this political formation. But let's not forget that the main electoral base of this party are still the Kurds, and who make up around 20% of the Turkish population, which is why the party always has a solid 10% of support that it's getting from that group of people. But let's not forget that the Kurds also vote for other parties, right? The AKP, while it might not be the first choice for Kurds, is still a very popular option for a lot of them, because a lot of Kurds are still Islamic. The element of religion plays a lot, and the AKP, as a result, is still a very good choice for them when it comes to looking for alternatives.
But if the AKP is in coalition with the MHP, which is very anti-Kurdish, does this sit well with the Kurdish voters?
And that's one of the reasons why I've mentioned that one of the bigger kind of building blocks behind the AKP's rise to power was that it could have united a lot of Turks together. One of them was the Kurds. But that was the part when Turkey was becoming, more democratic. It was opening the Kurdish peace process. I think that started in 2013, lasted till 2015. And yes, then the AKP was attracting. But the biggest problem is that the more Turkey invested in the Kurdish peace process, the less Kurds were actually voting for the AKP, because they found that, well, if there's more democracy, why vote for the AKP if you can vote for your own parties, right? And so that's when Erdogan realized that he was starting to lose Kurds. And at that time, yes, he went into a coalition with the MHP, which is an ultra-right-wing party. And essentially, whatever values that he had in order to attract the Kurdish vote have become extremely hard to maintain, in part because the ultra-nationalist vote does not like to talk about the Kurdish questions as much. And as a result, there is a kind of push. I mean, there are two forces, right? The AKP, which would possibly, as much as it could, want to attract the Kurdish vote, but unfortunately it's constrained by the MHP, which would preferably not go in this direction. But at this stage, it seems this kind of dysfunctional coalition seems to work in the sense that Erdogan's getting more nationalist votes than he is losing of the Kurdish votes. So I think he's still making up more than he's losing with this coalition. And as a result, this is why he's been staying in that formation.
So that was just as complicated as I had predicted. And now we can move on to something equally complicated, which is the presidential candidates. So the main ones are Erdogan and Kilicdaroglu. We know quite a lot about Erdogan, 20 years in power. So how is Kilicdaroglu different, or how is he similar to the incumbent?
I mean, I'd say that there's more similarity than difference in between them. I mean, both of these politicians have been on the Turkish stage for, decades. Kemal Kilicdaroglu has been the leader, as I've said, of the CHP since 2010. But he's been, of course, well socialized when it comes to Turkish politics. He's been an active member since already the 90s, and he's built himself up through Turkish institutions to the point where he is today. And I think that if you ask any person particularly any younger person the street, they would easily answer that for them, both Erdogan and Kilicdaroglu are part of the old establishment. I mean, they're both people who are of older age, and they don't necessarily attract a lot of kind of sympathy from the younger society, which kind of sees them as essentially the same side, as two different sides of the same coin when it comes to their political support. But of course, yes, Kilicdaroglu, while he is to some extent similar, and I think politically they're both kind of balancing each other out when it comes to their political achievements. Kilicdaroglu is at the end of the day the leader of the opposition. His main argument is that, of course, Erdogan, his government has done a lot of negative stuff in Turkey that has unfortunately led to the backsliding of democracy, of the economy. That has led to a lot of frustration, and he's presenting himself to be an alternative to Erdogan, who's going to fix a lot of the stuff that has went wrong. And I think that this is his biggest appeal. His biggest appeal is not that he has a specific agenda, that he has points and arguments that the society likes. He's just gaining on the fact that I think that people are tired with President Erdogan's rule, and that there is just some form of an alternative that that they might want to try. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact, as I've mentioned, not with the campaign itself, but with the fact that after more than 20 years of Erdogan's rule, people are just tired with the AKP and are looking for any type of option. And I think that that's his actually biggest reason why he's become so popular for the last couple of months.
So not necessarily different, but a different surname.
Yes, I would say so.
Okay. So you've already started to go into some of the background ahead of the elections. So some of the democratic backsliding, the economic position. But I would like to start off, first of all, with the impact of the terrible earthquakes that happened in February. What impact are these having on the election campaign?
Well, I'd say that the initial impact when we first kind of were looking at the earthquake in the weeks that followed after it, that signaled to us that this was going to be the main topic of discussion because, I mean, we're looking at over 50,000 people dead, essentially whole cities wiped out. So this would have been possibly the main talking point, and one would speculate that the election would be circling around that. And unfortunately, or well, maybe this is the speciality of Turkish politics, that hasn't come to fruition. In the sense that, yes, the earthquake has been talked about by the media, but the more we move to the election date, the less this is of a topic, in part because there's a dozen of other substitute topics which find far more interest in the Turkish society than necessarily talking about the earthquake. And so the earthquake in general, I'd say it was in the media, but since the media is controlled largely by Erdogan, it has been kind of in a very strategic way put aside as one of the things that, just so happened, and it isn't no longer in the spotlight when it comes to the discussion. In fact, I barely hear it in the campaign itself. So I think that this has to do a lot with the way how the ruling party has managed the topic, controlling the narrative around it and essentially making it so that, the earthquake happened and let's just move on with that. And the opposition wasn't able to also really kind of utilize this topic much. So this is, I would say that the earthquake was definitely felt in Turkish politics, but I don't think that it had a big impact when it comes to the election itself. I mean, I think that regardless of what would have happened, I think that the election would still be very much in the same place.
So among these numerous topics which are now more important than the earthquake, what are they? Is one of them the economy?
Yes, I think that this is one of the biggest topics still. I mean, the economy is something that every citizen feels in the sense of their pocket, of their wallet. They feel the economic pressure of inflation, particularly with the prices continuously going up. I mean, official statistics show that inflation is going down, but in reality, prices each month are still, going up. And I think citizens are struggling very, very badly. And the opposition knows about this. And this is one of the reasons why they keep talking about, social welfare programs, how they're going to revive the Turkish economy, what they're going to do after Erdogan in order to, bring stability and, again, development. And this is also one of the topics that Erdogan himself, he's trying to capitalize on, saying that, look, we might be in a tough situation, but it's only under my government that I'm capable of sorting all these issues. And that, if you vote for the opposition, the situation is going to get worse. I have a plan, so vote for me, and, we're going to get out out of this mess after the elections. And so, yes, the economy is, I think, one of the biggest topics, and we've seen a lot of moves from the current ruling party when it comes to, subsidizing this, giving free gas to people right now before the elections, and doing a lot of these economic moves, because these things are really, I think, the bread and butter of this campaign. This is something that people, the general people who go to the polling stations, feel, and they can appreciate what the ruling party does, or they can appreciate what the opposition might, give them. So I think the economy is the number one topic of discussion here.
So it's difficult to know which argument to listen to, but looking from the outside, the polls seem reasonably well balanced. So the result is not entirely predictable. And I would like to ask you now, is it possible for Erdogan and the AKP party to lose power?
If we take into consideration that losing power means essentially giving away the last 20 years of accomplishments that Erdogan has, built in Turkey. And by accomplishments, I don't mean just, the things that he's leaving in terms of his legacy, the mosques, the bridges and stuff like that. But he has a whole cadre, like a whole apparatus of the state that he has built himself, like a custom-made suit with the ministries and, the people that he has put in private companies. Essentially, for him to lose power, it means to give up a whole structure of interconnections that he has in his pocket right now. And as a result, the stakes are very high for the current president to do such a thing. And I think what's going to decide whether Erdogan gives away power or not is the scale of his either victory, or in this case, if we were talking about losing power, his loss. I mean, if he loses by, I think, 1 or 2%, I think he's going to be still very much in the electoral race, trying to do everything in order to either repeat the elections or something like that. Because, as I've said, the stakes of giving away power are too big for him. And, I mean, the last thing he wants to do is, on the 100th anniversary of the Republic, essentially be stepping down. But if he's going to lose by, 10%, so he's clearly going to lose, then, yes, I mean, there is a big unknown as to whether he will give power. I think that Turkey is still a democracy in the sense that without public support, popular support for the president and the party, it's impossible to rule the country. So Turkey, and whatever party wins, it needs to win the popular support also. I mean, so you cannot throw and make up numbers. I mean, you really have to get there and make sure that you have also a popular base of support. So I think that if Erdogan does not have that support, then there's a big question as to what's going to happen with him. And I think that there's if he loses tragically the elections, then with a huge margin in favor of opposition, then I think we should be getting ready for either Erdogan stepping down or perhaps somebody replacing him.
And what if Erdogan and the AKP win? Would we see any very strong reactions, like another coup or massive street protests?
Well, because of how high the stakes are and the fact that I think the opposition feels that they have the elections essentially they've essentially won the elections. I mean, there's a lot of people who have this kind of strong confidence in themselves that it's over. Erdogan has lost his power. I think that if Erdogan wins and the AKP wins, there will be protests because of that, because I think that the emotions on both sides of the political stage of the polarized Turkish scene are very high, and I wouldn't see this election going down, even in the case Erdogan wins, in a very kind of simple, straightforward way where everybody accepts the result and we move on. No, I think the stakes are so high at this stage that, and the emotions surrounding this campaign are so kind of inflamed, and at the same time building on this enragement, particularly the opposition. That it would be very hard for me to imagine this campaign kind of ending very easily. When it comes to the question of what it means for the AKP and his coalition partner to win for the next upcoming years, the right to rule Turkey. Well, for first of all, this means the consolidation of their power. I memean, they've already consolidated a lot after the coup, cleaning out the administration, the military from all elements, potential elements of unloyal factions. But at the same time, yes, I think that he would continue down, Erdogan would continue down the road of consolidating his power, essentially taking into consideration that he's also going to be struggling with the loss of support down the road. I mean, I don't see him becoming a more popular leader down the road. Even if he fixes the economy, I think he's going to be struggling. And as a result, that's going to be automatically leading the AKP to consolidate and try to take as much power as possible to make sure that the state is under their control, not under the control of factions or political institutions that might have too much autonomy and as a result be a source of instability for the AKP. So I think that yes, the element of consolidating power will be a feature of this new upcoming government of Erdogan's government if he is to win the elections.
Okay, thank you. I think until the 14th or perhaps the 28th of May, that's all we can really say about the election result. So I'd like to move on to some more general topics. Of course, we don't know who's going to win, but are there any preferences in the region from Turkey's neighbors?
When looking at the campaign and the external states which are to some extent involved in this election or at least have stakes, I mean, what we see first of all is a huge activization of Russia around this. I mean, I think that if there is one player which has a huge stake at Erdogan maintaining his power, it's Putin. I mean, Putin has found himself in possibly one of the most disastrous positions because of the war in Ukraine. And as a result, Erdogan, with who he has always been punching blows and, kind of trading, for Putin, Erdogan has become this kind of lifeline, along with China and, other Central Asian states. This is one of the few actors which is capable of, with which you can talk, do business at a moment where he needs to be doing business.
Well, is it better the devil you know, or is the opposition clearly anti-Russian?
Well, no. I mean, the opposition is very much pro-Russian. I mean, in the sense that they are upholding, in their manifesto itself, they're very openly speaking that they're going to uphold, continue the current relations with Russia as two equal states, and they're not showing any type of difference or divergence from the current ruling party. But the difference is a coalition of 6 parties. And the unknown that it surrounds when it comes to them gaining power doesn't entice Putin with optimism when it comes to working with them. So I mean, I think he would prefer to work with Erdogan in the sense that Erdogan for him is far more of a predictable actor. He knows him, right? They've known each other for years right now, and they have a really good relationship, a kind of personal relationship. And I think that this is one of the reasons why I think Russia might be a little bit more interested in having Erdogan in power, but it's not like Erdogan, going off the Turkish stage would cause a colossal change in Turkey's policy towards Russia, because I mean the opposition itself is also very pro-Russian, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that Turkey buys a lot of gas from Russia, so it is structurally bound to Moscow. It has conflicts in Syria where Russia is also present, and you cannot solve Syria without Moscow. So the opposition understands that Moscow is part of Turkish politics, foreign policy, and you cannot just win the election and forget about Russia. It's because Russia is there structurally. So that is the main point. When it comes to the election itself, I mean, what we're seeing right now is, for example, President Erdogan on Thursday, I think that's the 27th of April, will be opening up the nuclear power plant Akkuyu, which is essentially a Russian nuclear plant. And, we're expecting that President Putin will be there virtually, at least in the opening ceremony. So this is one of the ways in which I think Russia is kind of present in this campaign. I mean, we do not see anything of the West doing something similar.
How does the public react, though? Does the public approve of, a virtual appearance from Putin?
Well, I don't think that this will be presented in that way. I think that the public is looking at it from the point of view that, hey, we're having the first nuclear reactor, the first nuclear power plant being opened in Turkey. That's what the public sees, right? They do not see that it's a Russian, essentially, power plant. So I think that it has to do, again, with how the media will be able to sell it. But, I mean, on a kind of purely international relations basis, what we see is Russia definitely taking part in this election and, giving Erdogan some type of positive, cards to play with so that he can show, in the elections. And, the launching of the first reactor in Akkuyu is a symbolic thing. But, if they can make a ceremony out of that, they can also show how Turkey is effectively cooperating with Russia and how essentially a state, a smaller state like Turkey, when it comes to its position internationally, is capable of, having big projects and sitting on the same bench on the same level with Russia. And so I think that Erdogan might definitely want to try to also send some type of a signal that, hey, look, we're cooperating with some of the biggest states in the world on some of the most fundamental topics. So I think that, yes, in terms of that, this is definitely going to be somewhere in between the lines.
Okay. And we've heard a lot about Turkey recently because Sweden is trying to join NATO and Turkey is blocking this. Is this likely to change after the election, regardless of who wins?
The Swedish question, we used to talk about the Finnish and the Swedish question, but Finland has been essentially given a green light by Turkey, and so this is already history. But when it comes to Sweden, this was part of a bigger political debate that Turkey was having with the West. I think that the situation with Sweden will continue to be going on even after the elections. Turkey will not likely let go of this topic, regardless of who rules, in part because Sweden is a fantastic card that Ankara has in order to bring other topics that Turkey considers to be sidelined by a lot of member states. Particularly speaking, we're talking about the Kurdish issue that a lot of NATO members haven't been taking seriously. And so by blocking Sweden's membership and voicing Ankara's huge criticism that the West, and particularly, of course, Sweden, is one of the harbingers of terrorism, Kurdish terrorism, that it can actually bring this to the agenda and to the forum of NATO. And I think that both the opposition and possibly and definitely the current ruling party, they see a lot of benefits of keeping kind of the topic of Sweden on the agenda, not saying no to Swedish membership, but still blocking it at this stage. I think it gives them the ability to really kind of, take these topics of Kurdish terrorism to NATO and have them essentially being brought up at every single topic. And at the same time, it generates a lot of kind of what you would call media hype. Everybody talks about that. And Turkey realizes that as a result, there is a kind of, this ability to put Turkey in the center of NATO and, as a decision maker, as a key holder. At the same time, we also have Turkey's relations with the United States, and this is where I think this whole Swedish thing also kind of touches. Turkey has a lot of kind of issues with Washington, and I think that, the Swedish question kind of feeds into it is in the sense that, hey, we're willing to give Sweden a green light, but, for example, we want you to consider other things like, selling us F-16 jets that we've been asking you for quite some time right now. Maybe there's something else under the table that we do not know, but I think that clearly Ankara is also using this whole Swedish question in order to get some type of compromises from Washington itself. And I think that until Ankara does not receive some sufficient compromises from Washington and perhaps other NATO member states, I don't think that the Swedish question will be easily solved. So summing up, there's the Kurdish question surrounding this Swedish topic, and there is Turkey's relations with the United States and other things that are also kind of bound to it. And I think that this is, again, the multi-layered and multifaceted element of this whole debacle surrounding the Swedish question, is that it's not so much about Sweden joining NATO as it is about Turkey getting something out of it.
I do have one final question. At the moment, there is a government which you have said is rather conservative, religious-leaning, and has nationalists in power. So theoretically, after the election, there will be a complete change, very liberal, more European-leaning.
If the opposition wins.
If the opposition wins. Theoretically, this could happen. In which case, should we expect Turkey to be fast-tracked for EU membership?
Well, I think that this is, first of all, EU membership requires Turkey solving a couple structural issues. One of them is Cyprus. This is the topic of, a continuously divided island where, essentially Turkey wants the autonomy of Northern Cyprus, whereas the Republic of Cyprus, seems to be leaning towards a bi-communal community. There's thousands of issues when it comes to this island itself, and this topic is very hard to solve. It's been going on since 1974, and we haven't seen any movement since that time. So this is one of those kind of
from Turkey.
Yes, from Turkey, but also from, I think, the EU. mean, it's essentially a frozen conflict where no side has much willingness to solve it. So, if we're talking about Turkey joining the EU, there are a number of elements that need to be fulfilled. Cyprus is one of them. Relations between Turkey and Greece is another element that, isn't necessarily, is a bit of a kind of roller coaster. I mean, right now we're having a kind of a better moment when it comes to their relations. But I mean, if we look back 6 months before, we were at the brink of war at some point between both of these nations. And I think that until the Aegean, Mediterranean questions, and particularly the sea maritime borders are not solved between both of these states, there is a lot of things that Turkey still needs to do in order to be, effectively admitted to the EU. What I do, however, think in terms of the opposition, if the opposition theoretically does win, we're going to see a shift in values when it comes to its relations with the West, in the sense that, yes, Turkey might be a little bit more respective of what's happening in Brussels. It might definitely go back on the track of, trying to democratize itself, which is more of a result of, trying to strip power away from Erdogan, rather than necessarily trying to join the EU. But I think they're going to definitely sell it in a sense to kind of bring themselves back closer to the Western core. Because right now they have a feeling that they have moved far outside of it to a point where they kind of, the black sheep in the herd. So I think that they would definitely try to revalue their politics, but that doesn't mean a complete reorientation. I mean, I don't think that Turkey is realistically expecting EU membership and the opposition is expecting EU membership, because they all know how many structural problems there are.
And so nobody is promising it at the moment.
I don't think that anybody is promising any type of that. I mean, the only thing is that we're talking about maybe a shift in values and, some type of approaches which will make the opposition easier to cooperate with when it comes to the West. But I wouldn't be expecting massive changes. And one of those elements is, of course, the question of Russia. I mean, I wouldn't be expecting Turkey, for example, to join the sanctions regime of the West, or, have any type of strict blows against Moscow. I mean, for Ankara, this is a red line that they will never cross, and regardless of who rules. So I think that in terms of that, this is a symbolic reorientation in foreign policy, but in general, I see more continuity taking place, regardless of who rules, than necessarily change.
Okay, so for now, until the end of May, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please like and subscribe to make sure you don't miss the follow-up discussion after the election.